She was just another face in the crowd, until he realized the ordinary woman he ignored was the one he couldn't live without. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because, tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Lena Thompson adjusted the strap of her tote bag as she stepped onto the crowded subway platform. The morning air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and coffee, and she drew a deep breath, bracing herself for another long day at work. To anyone passing by, she looked ordinary, her dark brown hair tucked into a simple bun, a muted navy blazer, and sensible flats. But inside, she carried a world of dreams and quiet ambitions that no one seemed to notice. For years, Lena had worked as an assistant at Marlowe & Company, a boutique investment firm, juggling endless tasks with a smile. Her talent for numbers, her ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, was a secret she rarely shared. She had learned the hard way that brilliance often went unnoticed when it didn't come wrapped in wealth or charm. As she swiped her Metro card, Lena's phone buzzed. A message from her younger brother popped up. "Don't forget Mom's birthday dinner tonight. She's expecting you." She smiled faintly, imagining her mother's warm kitchen, the aroma of roasted chicken and cinnamon, a rare comfort that grounded her hectic life. Meanwhile, in a skyscraper 15 stories above downtown, Julian Carrington stared out of his floor-to-ceiling window at the city below. He adjusted the cuff of his designer shirt, a reflex born from years of perfectionism. Julian was a billionaire, a man whose name appeared on magazine covers and whose business decisions moved markets. People admired him, envied him, and feared him. But despite the accolades, a subtle emptiness tugged at him, a sense that wealth and power were hollow if no one saw the man behind them. Julian had a reputation for noticing talent, but only the obvious kind. The women at his office parties were all flawless, polished, and predictable. None of them intrigued him. And yet, today, as he reviewed reports for an acquisition meeting, an assistant mentioned a new candidate at the partner firm, someone whose performance had quietly disrupted the norm. "Who is she?" Julian asked casually, but his tone carried curiosity. His assistant shrugged, dismissive. "Just another analyst. Ordinary, I think." The word struck Julian oddly, not because he agreed, but because it challenged him. The idea that someone could be overlooked, that brilliance could exist in plain sight, stirred something unfamiliar in him. By mid-morning, fate nudged them closer. Lena arrived at Marlowe & Company's headquarters to deliver an urgent report to one of the senior partners. As she entered the gleaming lobby, her eyes met Julian's for the first time. He was standing near the elevators, reviewing a tablet, unaware of the world around him. Lena's heart skipped a beat, not because of attraction exactly, but because something in his presence made the air feel charged. She thought he would glance at her and continue, but his eyes lingered a moment longer than expected, just enough to make her question why a man like him would notice someone like her. A moment of silence stretched between them, subtle, heavy with unspoken tension. Then, Lena reminded herself to focus on the task at hand and quickly handed the folder to the partner. She tried not to let curiosity, or something else, creep into her mind. As Julian watched her retreat, a thought whispered through his mind. "She's ordinary, yet I can't stop looking." It was a quiet spark, almost imperceptible, but it would ignite a chain of events neither of them could have anticipated. In a world where appearances dictated value, Julian's fascination was already forming, and Lena had no idea her life was about to change. Have you ever felt invisible in a world that rewards only the obvious? Share a moment when someone truly saw you, unexpectedly, in the comments below. The gala was alive with glittering lights, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the hum of carefully curated conversation. Lena moved through the crowd like a shadow, careful to remain invisible. She hadn't come to be noticed, she had come to gather information for her firm's upcoming merger pitch. But even as she navigated the maze of tuxedos and cocktail dresses, she couldn't ignore the surreal opulence surrounding her, crystal chandeliers reflecting in polished marble, servers gliding silently with silver trays, and the faint scent of expensive perfume that seemed almost tangible in the air. Julian arrived shortly after, sharp in a tailored suit that whispered authority. Every movement, from the tilt of his head to the way he held his glass, radiated command. Yet beneath the polished exterior, there was curiosity, the kind that prowled silently when something, or someone, shifted the familiar. He scanned the room, his eyes eventually landing on her. Lena, in a simple black dress that contrasted the extravagance around her, moved with purpose, unaware of the magnetism she now exerted. He approached her under the guise of casual interest, letting his voice carry the effortless charm that often opened doors for him. "You don't belong here," he said softly, not as a judgment, but as a statement that puzzled even him. Lena paused, glancing at him with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "I belong wherever I'm invited," she replied, her tone steady, though her pulse quickened. Julian studied her, noting the subtle grace in the way she held herself, the quiet confidence that didn't need loud announcements. Everything about her contradicted his assumptions. Ordinary? She was remarkable in ways he hadn't anticipated. The collision came not in words, but in proximity. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne misstepped, sending a glass teetering dangerously close to Lena's hand. Instinctively, Julian moved, catching it with a swift motion that brushed against her fingers. The electric contact lingered longer than necessary. Lena's eyes met his, and for the first time, neither could look away. The moment hung suspended, dense with an unspoken question neither dared to ask. She wanted to retreat, to ground herself in the world she knew. He wanted to pull her closer, to unravel the mystery that had appeared so suddenly in his meticulously ordered life. Then a brief interruption. A colleague of his called his name. Julian excused himself, but as he stepped away, he couldn't resist a final glance at Lena. She was standing slightly off-center, her posture composed yet unguarded, eyes scanning the crowd. Something in that stance, a mix of vulnerability and inner strength, etched itself into his mind. Later, as Lena mingled with executives, Julian's curiosity grew. He moved through the crowd with precision, catching fragments of her conversation. Her intelligence shone quietly, her observations sharp but not boastful. In one moment he heard her challenge a senior investor's assumption, her calm rebuttal cutting through the applause with understated brilliance. He frowned, caught between irritation and admiration. She was ordinary, he reminded himself, but somehow, every fiber of him protested the label. By the time the evening was winding down, their paths intersected again. Lena was stepping onto the balcony, taking a breath of the cool night air. The city skyline stretching behind her like a sea of stars. Julian followed, closer than socially necessary, yet careful not to alarm her. "You're not like anyone else here," he said, the words almost a whisper over the hum of the city below. Lena turned, studying him as if deciding whether to treat this as a harmless remark or a truth that cut too deep. "Maybe that's because I don't want to be," she replied, a trace of defiance softening the edge of vulnerability. A pause stretched between them. The air was heavy, charged. He wanted to cross the distance, to know what made her tick, to understand how someone so unassuming could stir such intensity in him. She wanted to retreat, to preserve the ordinariness that protected her from being devoured by people like him. And yet, neither moved. In that collision, brief, fleeting, but unforgettable, the rules of their worlds began to fracture. Lena realized she couldn't ignore the pull he exerted, while Julian recognized that his fascination was no longer a fleeting curiosity. Something had shifted. It was not yet love, and perhaps not even desire, but it was a beginning. A spark that promised to grow into something uncontrollable, if they allowed it. The morning after the gala, Lena sat at her favorite cafe, a small corner table overlooking a quiet street. Sunlight spilled over her coffee cup, warming her hands, yet the memory of Julian lingered like an uninvited shadow. She told herself it was nothing, an accidental glance, a fleeting spark, but her heart betrayed her logic. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles in silence, to let a man disrupt her carefully constructed boundaries. Her phone buzzed. A message from her colleague reminded her of the merger presentation. Lena forced her attention to spreadsheets, graphs, and projections, But every calculation felt muted, every number hollow. Her mind kept returning to the gallery of eyes at the gala, to the way Julian's gaze had lingered longer than politeness allowed. She shook her head, letting out a sigh she didn't realize she'd been holding. Meanwhile, Julian's office hummed with activity. Phones rang, assistants hustled, and contracts needed his signature. Yet, despite the chaos, his thoughts revolved around Lena. He replayed her poise, the subtle way she corrected assumptions without arrogance, the quiet intelligence that had startled him. He told himself it was an obsession he could manage, a curiosity he could suppress. But as the hours passed, the edges of control began to fray. Their worlds remained parallel yet tantalizingly close. When a business call unexpectedly brought Julian to the same neighborhood as Lena, their paths nearly collided again. Lena entered the building with purposeful steps, ready to focus on work. Julian stepped out of the elevator, and for a brief heartbeat, the world shrank to the narrow space between them. "Ms. Thompson," Julian said, his voice carrying the faintest edge of something unspoken. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I have work to do," she replied evenly, a shield in her tone. Yet the tremor in her hands betrayed a flicker of awareness that he noticed immediately. Their interaction was polite, controlled, professional, but electric. Every sentence was measured, every smile carefully weighed. They each wanted something from the other, though neither would admit it. Julian had to restrain the magnetic pull drawing him closer. Lena had to guard against the vulnerability he provoked. For the next week, their interactions became a delicate dance of avoidance and unintended connection. Emails exchanged for work became subtly infused with personal observations. He praised her insight once, and she deflected it with a joke that didn't quite land. The air between them thickened with unsaid truths, tension that neither dared confront openly. Then came the unplanned encounter in the office kitchen. Lena was reaching for a coffee mug when Julian appeared behind her. She stiffened instinctively, bracing herself against the thrill that always arrived unannounced. "You really are persistent," he said softly, leaning casually against the counter. "I'm thorough," she replied, her voice clipped, but her eyes flicked up, catching his in a moment of mutual recognition. The humor was a thin veil for the silent admission that neither could ignore the pull building between them. The room fell into a quiet rhythm. Neither wanted to bridge the gap, yet neither could fully step back. Her resistance wasn't denial of attraction. It was a self-preservation instinct honed through years of being overlooked. His restraint was pride that battled a growing vulnerability he hadn't experienced in years. That evening, Lena stood by her apartment window, city lights spilling across the horizon. She sipped tea, trying to convince herself that Julian Carrington was nothing more than an intriguing anomaly, a fleeting spark destined to fade. She clenched her mug as a wave of frustration passed through her. Why did someone so powerful stir such unease in her chest? At the same time, Julian sat in his penthouse, overlooking the same skyline from the other side of town. The city buzzed below, but he felt suspended in a private tension. He recalled the curve of her smile, the way her hands moved when she was absorbed in thought, the quiet confidence that defied every expectation he had of ordinary. He rubbed his temples, recognizing the truth he fought to deny. He wanted her. Not just the idea of her, but all of her. The brilliance, the defiance, the ordinary turned extraordinary essence that gnawed at him relentlessly. Neither could articulate the frustration, yet it shaped every thought and interaction. Each resisted not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of vulnerability, fear of a world that didn't reward honesty in the way it rewarded status. The merger presentation had hit an unexpected snag. A key partner from the other firm had canceled at the last minute, leaving both Marlowe and Company and Julian's company scrambling. Lena found herself pulled into a joint problem-solving session, the kind of high-pressure environment she usually avoided. She hadn't expected to encounter Julian in such close quarters again, yet there he was, reviewing spreadsheets and legal briefs with precise, relentless focus. They were forced into the same conference room, laptops open, the hum of air conditioning punctuated by the occasional clack of keys. Lena kept her posture rigid, intent on professionalism, but the proximity made it impossible to ignore the subtle energy between them. Julian, equally restrained, observed her carefully. Every glance revealed more than words could convey: the sharpness of her mind, the steadiness of her hands, and the quiet determination she carried like armor. "Your projections are thorough," Julian said, leaning slightly over her shoulder to examine a graph. There was a note of respect in his tone, a rarity that made her stomach tighten. "I do my job," she replied, careful not to let the compliment linger. Her voice was steady, but the brief brush of his arm as he adjusted a sheet of paper sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. For hours they worked side by side. The initial tension began to soften into a rhythm of mutual reliance. Julian would ask pointed questions, and Lena would answer with clarity and precision. Occasionally he would make an observation that challenged her, forcing her to think differently, and she would counter with insights that surprised him. Neither could deny the growing awareness that the other was indispensable in this moment. Outside the room, the city skyline glimmered under late afternoon sunlight. Inside, they shared the quiet concentration of collaboration, the kind that required trust without words. A miscalculated figure prompted Julian to glance at Lena, and for a split second, he saw the vulnerability beneath her composure, a glimpse of the ordinary woman who had become anything but in his eyes. By evening, the crisis had been resolved. Both companies' teams praised the results, but Julian lingered, refusing to leave immediately. He motioned for Lena to join him on the terrace. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of evening rain that had left the streets glistening below. "You're more capable than anyone gave you credit for," he said, a rare note of admiration threading his words. He didn't need her to respond immediately. The truth hung between them, heavier than any conversation. Lena hesitated. She wanted to protest, to remind herself that this wasn't personal, that it was simply circumstance. But the warmth of the terrace, the quiet of the city lights, and the intensity of his gaze made her pause. "I know how to do my job," she said finally, a whisper of defiance hiding the flicker of pride she felt. Julian smiled, just slightly, recognizing the subtle acknowledgement without needing more. Their conversation dissolved into silence, yet it was a comfortable one, the kind that suggested understanding had passed where words were unnecessary. That night, Lena reflected on the day as she walked home. She couldn't stop replaying the collaboration, the way he had seen her, challenged her, yet never patronized. It unsettled her, this recognition that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. She realized that their worlds, once so separate, had been forced to intersect, and in doing so, had begun to break down the walls she had spent years building. Julian, in his penthouse, stared at the city sprawled beneath him, his thoughts unwillingly consumed by her. He recalled the precision in her answers, the firmness in her stance, the calm in her voice. For the first time, his fascination felt more than superficial. It was grounded in admiration and respect. He understood that he wanted not just the spark she ignited but the full force of who she was: intelligent, unyielding, and remarkable. Forced together by circumstance, neither could ignore the unspoken connection growing between them. The push and pull, the resistance, the curiosity, the subtle acknowledgement of attraction, was no longer a fleeting anomaly. It had become real and unavoidable. Have you ever been forced to work closely with someone you couldn't ignore? Did it change how you saw them? Share your story in the comments. The weekend brought rain, tapping against the glass walls of Julian's office, turning the city below into a blur of lights and reflections. Lena arrived for a follow-up meeting, unaware that today would test everything they had built in the last weeks. Julian was unusually tense, a quiet storm behind his composed exterior. She sensed it immediately. "Sit," he said, motioning toward the leather chairs across from his desk. There was no preamble, no casual greetings. Only the weight of unspoken words pressed between them. Lena studied him, noticing the slight furrow of his brow, the tight set of his jaw. "What's wrong?" she asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "I've been thinking about us," he admitted. His voice was low, almost vulnerable, a crack in the armor that fascinated and frightened her simultaneously. "You mean to this?" Lena asked, gesturing vaguely at the tension crackling in the air. "Yes," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I can't ignore it. Thought I could, but I can't. And I know I shouldn't, but I want you. I've never—" Before he could finish, Lena stood abruptly, the motion sharp and defensive. "Julian," she interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't understand. I'm not like anyone in your world. I'm not a project, I'm not a novelty. I can't be your obsession." Her words hung like glass between them. Julian's expression shifted, shock, disbelief, then something darker, fear of losing control. "I never said you were a project," he murmured, stepping closer. I can't stop thinking about you. I don't know why. You don't get it." Lena snapped, tears threatening to spill. "I work every day to be seen, to matter. And you—" She stopped, choking back the emotion she rarely allowed herself. "You can't just notice me and expect me to fit into your life." The tension exploded into confrontation. Julian's hand lifted, then fell, unsure whether to reach for her or retreat. "I'm not expecting anything," he said, his voice tight. I can't ignore the truth. And now I see it's not just fascination. I can't be caught in this," Lena said, her voice cracking. "Not now. Not like this. Not with someone who lives in a world that will never understand the quiet I carry. I'm ordinary to you, just like everyone told me. And maybe I'm meant to stay that way." The room seemed to shrink around them, the rain outside turning into a relentless drumbeat that echoed the rhythm of their fractured connection. Julian's jaw tightened. "You're not ordinary," he said, softer this time, a whisper barely above the rain. "You're everything I didn't know I was missing." Her silence was deafening. Neither knew how to bridge the gap between admiration and fear, between longing and distrust. The truth was raw. Both had become vulnerable in ways they weren't prepared to face. Lena had exposed her heart. Julian had revealed desire and need, a dangerous combination neither could fully control. Finally, Lena moved toward the door, her coat wrapped tightly around her as though it could shield her from the storm, both outside and inside. Julian reached for her hand instinctively, but she pulled away. "I have to go," she said, voice quivering. "I can't." He caught her gaze, the room heavy with everything left unsaid. "Then I'll wait," he whispered. "I'll wait until you're ready to let me in." The collision left them fractured, separated by fear and pride, yet tethered by undeniable truth. Lena walked out into the rain, the city lights reflecting her uncertainty. Julian remained behind, staring at the empty chair where she had sat, the silence of the office pressing down on him. The obsession he had tried to deny had transformed into something more profound, a longing that cut deeper than any business deal or social conquest. This was their lowest point. The breaking of walls, the confrontation with past insecurities, and the exposure of raw desire had left them both exposed. Yet the tension, the crack in their defenses, hinted that even in this collapse, something could endure, if they dared to take the next step. The city was silent beneath Lena's apartment window, the kind of quiet that forced reflection. She sat curled on the edge of her sofa, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The encounter at Julian's office replayed endlessly in her mind. The intensity, the confrontation, the way he had seen her, really seen her, in a world that rarely noticed. She thought of all the walls she had built over the years, shields crafted from independence and self-reliance. Letting someone in felt dangerous, like stepping into a storm without shelter. Julian had shattered more than one preconception. He had made her realize that the ordinary label she had worn for years was a lie. But could she risk vulnerability again? Could she trust someone whose world existed in opulence and influence, a world that had nothing to do with her reality? Meanwhile, Julian stood in his penthouse, overlooking the glittering skyline. His hands rested on the glass railing, knuckles white from tension. He had spent the past week replaying their collision, analyzing every word, every glance. The obsession he had tried to resist had evolved into clarity. He wanted her, not as a trophy or conquest, but as an equal, someone whose presence challenged him, inspired him, grounded him. He considered walking away, retreating into his controlled, ordered life, but the thought of letting her slip into the ordinary world without him gnawed at his chest. He had to choose. Remaining guarded, playing the role of detached billionaire, felt like betrayal to her and to himself. That evening, fate intervened again. Lena was at a charity gala, attending at her mother's insistence. The room shimmered with chandeliers and carefully chosen music, but she felt disconnected from the spectacle. She wanted nothing more than to escape the glare of expectation and find solitude. Julian approached quietly, his presence commanding without intrusion. "May I?" he asked, offering a hand as though asking permission to cross an invisible boundary. Lena studied him for a moment, weighing her fear against the longing she couldn't deny. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. In that contact, the air shifted. No words were necessary. The touch carried recognition, understanding, and a promise of shared vulnerability. "I don't know how this works," she whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know if we can survive the differences in our worlds." Julian's gaze softened. "I don't know either," he admitted, "but I do know that I don't want to go another day pretending I can ignore what we feel. We'll figure it out. Together." Her chest tightened, emotions teetering between hope and fear. The decision wasn't easy, but the clarity of choice was undeniable. Step into love fully, accept the risks, and allow herself to be seen completely. Lena nodded, squeezing his hand, a silent agreement that echoed louder than any vow. They walked together to the balcony, the city lights stretching infinitely around them. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked streets and the faint hint of jasmine from nearby planters. They didn't need conversation. The proximity, the shared silence, spoke volumes. For the first time, both acknowledged the risk and the reward in the same breath. Julian reached for her face gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're extraordinary," he murmured. "I see you. All of you." Tears brimmed in Lena's eyes, but they weren't tears of fear. They were relief, gratitude, and recognition of a love that had survived doubt, pride, and hesitation. For once, being seen was not dangerous, it was liberation. The choice had been made. Walls lowered, defenses abandoned. Vulnerability, once terrifying, became the bridge to connection. And in that delicate space, both discovered that love wasn't about perfection or compatibility of worlds. It was about recognition, trust, and the courage to embrace uncertainty together. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Julian's penthouse in soft gold. The city hummed quietly below, but inside, the world had shifted entirely. Lena stood near the balcony, her hair catching the light, her posture relaxed yet radiant. She was no longer the hesitant, ordinary woman who had walked cautiously through his office weeks ago. She was seen, recognized, and, more importantly, fully herself. Julian appeared behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The simple gesture spoke volumes: comfort, familiarity, and shared life. "I thought you might like this," he said softly, offering one to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, a small spark in a room already heavy with intimacy. Lena smiled, accepting the cup. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied, his eyes warm, unguarded. "I've realized that ordinary and extraordinary aren't opposites. You've taught me that being remarkable doesn't always come with spectacle. Sometimes it's quiet, strong, and completely unnoticed, until it isn't." They sipped in silence, watching the city wake. Lena let herself breathe, absorbing the ease of the moment. Julian's presence was no longer intimidating, it was grounding. She realized that the tension she had feared, the disparities between their worlds, the scrutiny of wealth, the weight of public perception, didn't matter here. None of it diminished what they had built together. Later, at a charity gala she had reluctantly agreed to attend with Julian, Lena moved through the crowd with newfound confidence. The previous unease she had felt in rooms like these had dissolved. She wasn't performing or hiding, she simply existed, and the acknowledgement of her authenticity radiated quietly around her. Julian, beside her, didn't just observe, he admired, respected, and celebrated her. A well-dressed socialite approached, attempting the customary small talk, but Lena's composure and insight effortlessly redirected the conversation. Julian's hand found hers mid-step, a gentle anchor. He leaned close and whispered, "I've never seen you like this before. You're mesmerizing." Lena laughed softly, a sound that carried relief and joy. "I'm just me," she replied, but the confidence behind her words was undeniable. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to shrink to fit someone else's expectations. She was whole, and love had only strengthened her. That evening, after the gala, they returned to Julian's penthouse. The city lights glittered like stars caught in glass. Julian took her hand, drawing her close, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Their connection had moved beyond attraction, obsession, or resistance. It was trust, recognition, and a profound emotional intimacy that neither could ignore. "I never want to forget this," Julian said quietly, brushing a finger along her jawline. That's how we started, how we got here." "You won't," Lena replied, resting her forehead against his chest. "Because I see you too, Julian. All of you. And I know you see me." He tightened his hold gently. "Every part," he whispered. The night stretched around them, peaceful yet charged with possibility. No interruptions, no distractions, just two people fully present, fully committed, and fully in love. For Lena, it was liberation. For Julian, it was fulfillment, a rare and treasured completion he had never known could exist outside the confines of wealth and power. Days later, at her mother's birthday dinner, Lena recounted her experiences quietly but with visible pride. Julian listened, engaging with her family with warmth and respect. The ordinary label she had once carried like a burden was gone. She moved freely in both worlds without compromise. Julian had adapted too, understanding that true partnership demanded humility, patience, and love that prioritized understanding over control. Their lives, once parallel, had finally merged. Lena continued her career, now recognized for brilliance and vision, while Julian learned to value connection beyond prestige or influence. Together, they navigated the complexities of love, difference, and societal expectation, not without effort, but with unwavering devotion. On a quiet evening, Lena and Julian returned to the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in reflection, a mirror of the journey they had traversed. Julian took both her hands in his, eyes glimmering with emotion. "You were never ordinary," he said, voice low, intense. "And now you're everything." Lena's smile was radiant, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "And you've shown me that love can see beyond appearances, beyond fear. That it's not about perfection, it's about being seen, truly." They embraced a long, tender hold that spoke of triumph over doubt, fear, and hesitation. In that moment, all the misunderstandings, the distance, and the resistance evaporated. Their story, once fraught with tension and uncertainty, had arrived at something rare, emotional completeness. Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place, with someone who changed how you saw yourself? Share your story in the comments. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.